Awesome. Thank you for joining us all this evening. My name's Siana, or CC's the easy version, and we're so excited to have you here joining us for the 2025 mountain bike online session. This is going to be a great opportunity for the mountain bike community to share their knowledge and resources, and we hope that the session will be informative and inspiring. A few things that I'd like to share with you as we kick off today. This session is being recorded and will be shared with the community next week. We also ask that you keep your microphone muted for the first part of the session. There'll be the opportunity to submit questions, and we encourage you to do that using the chat function, and we'll have time allocated for these at the end. We'll try to get through as many as possible, and we estimate finishing around 8:15. The purpose of the session is to help our community get to know each other or share insights and to strengthen our knowledge. We've got a wealth of experience with the team on the call, and I'd like to introduce you. If you could just give me a wave for now, I'd like to introduce you to Steve Peterson. He is the head of events for mountain bike and cyclocross. We've got Jeff Hughes, Daryl Cram, and Susan Mitchell, all highly experienced commissaires with a wealth of knowledge in mountain biking and also experience in multiple other disciplines. Throughout the chat today, they'll be sharing their journeys, the training they undertook, and some of the experiences that helped shape them. I'd also like to recognise you guys and girls on the call with us tonight. We've got a variety of people on the call with varying levels of experience and from varying sports and disciplines as well. So we really appreciate you finding the time and joining us this evening. What I might do, because I'm going to have Jeff welcoming and supporting me for the first part of the session. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute and sharing a little bit about yourself and your experience in mountain biking.
Yeah, sure, CC. So I suppose I first started riding a mountain bike in 1982, maybe, around there, anyway, a long time ago. I got involved basically commissairing when my kids were racing, and I'd turn up at races with my son. He teenage boy, didn't really want me hanging around, so I found something. I'm a parent that couldn't sit around and do nothing, so I got involved. Chris Clark roped me into commissaring to start with, and I've been involved pretty much ever since. Living in Canberra, I was involved pretty heavily with the Cork running the 2007, 8 and 9 national champs here, and then 2008 and 9 world championships. I started off doing club events, worked my way through nationals. I did all the national commissaire at nearly every national round for probably 5 or 6 years. Been lucky enough to commissaire at Commonwealth Games, world championships, and several other rather large events. I've recently aspired to being the PCP at the last 2 national championships, which has been quite challenging in its own way. And I help run commissaire's training courses, get pretty heavily involved with what's going on behind the scenes as well. So, yeah, I hope that's enough, CC.
Yeah, I will ask you just one question. Do you have an event or a race that stands out and has left a lasting impression on you, Jeff?
Yeah, probably my first ever track race that I went to, which was actually the Commonwealth Games. I was like a complete fish out of water, but luckily Griffo, who was the chief for Com Games, assigned me to a job that I felt very comfortable with, and that was measuring bikes. I'm a tradie by trade, so I know what a tape measure looks like. And I spent the whole of the track event every evening, because I was going to the mountain bike venue during the day and then going back to the track of an evening measuring bikes. So that was really good fun. It was a real eye-opener and really great to work with a really big team of super experienced commissaires. So I learned a lot at that event.
Another question for you, Jeff. How have your experiences shaped the way you approach decision making during events?
I think most of my experience actually comes from a previous life in corporate. I worked for a couple of US multinationals for the first part of my working life. Was national, had some national responsibilities and had 150 people working for me at various stages. And so that's probably I've brought that into commissaring more than the other way around. So I've tried to engender that team-based attitude, try and impart knowledge onto people, and try and encourage people to actually be their best and have a crack. The old adage that who's the one that's at fault, the person that has a go and goes out and does their best, or the person that sends them out there knowing that they're going to need support and not giving them any support. So yeah, so that's, I try and live by that every day actually. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Jeff. We'll hear more from Jeff along the way, and he's got some other tips and tricks I'm sure he'll be happy to share. So
Absolutely.
we're going to talk through the Commissaire pathway today. And firstly, before we go for a wander around the website, just want to highlight the minimum requirements to be a Commissaire. So there's 3 key details that Commissaires need to keep up to date, which will then allow them to be covered while they're operating an event. So number 1 is your Oz Cycling membership. And for a Commissaire, that does need to be a non-riding membership as a minimum. Please be aware that some of these terms and these requirements are different if you're wearing a coach or instructor hat, just for highlighting. You do need to have an accreditation suitable for the discipline, and we'll talk about the different levels. And also it is a requirement to have a current working with children or current working with vulnerable people. If one of those 3 things is not up to date in the Oz Cycling membership system, we recommend that you don't offer your services because you're not meeting all the requirements. And if there are any club officers on the call today, there is the ability for a club officer to pull their club's data for commissaires and officials, and there is the ability to check that through the Oz Cycling system. So as if that's something that you'd like, I do have a cheat sheet. There will be an email address or 2 provided towards the end. Please flick us an email and we can flick you the cheat sheet to help set you up for success. Let's head to the Oz Cycling website. So let's see if I can make this work. Oz Cycling website there. Escape, sorry, not that one, Control Tab. Sorry. Awesome. So on the Oz Cycling website, can I just get a thumbs up that we're on the Oz Cycling website with me? Fabulous. Where you can find a bunch of helpful information is under the coaching and officiating tab, and then scrolling down to how to become official. We're going to have, we've got a officials courses section and the resources section as well, with a bunch of helpful information. On the Oz Cycling website, we've got how you can become an official. I'm sure a bunch of you are already officials and work through this, but it's a great place if you're trying to bring others along on the journey, knowing where to find this information, how to get involved, and there's information here about how to start. And this leads us into, where is it hiding now? This one, which has the Commissaire pathway framework. So there's a lot of information here, and I'm not going to go through all of the details, and I will highlight some of the key things. So you can see the different levels here. For mountain biking, we've got the regional Commissaire, the national Commissaire, and then the elite and international courses. Through this document, you can see the delivery method and other requirements to understand. Some of you, can I just get a show of hands? Did any of you come from Mountain Bike Australia or get your accreditation under Mountain Bike Australia? So some people might not be familiar with the name change. So you can see down the right-hand side what the old name was and what that is under Oz Cycling. And this document can be found on the Become an Official page. And down here is that document that I just showed you. Jeffrey, I'm going to hand you over to talk about the officials courses and the opportunities that are available.
Sure, thanks, CC. So in mountain bike, we try and run one national course per year for people to upskill their accreditation from being a regional commissaire to a national commissaire. And to become a regional commissaire, there's an online course that you need to complete, which is basically would take you probably half a day if you're experienced, to work through the process, answer the questions, answer the quiz, and then get some experience. So a few years ago, we transitioned to an online course. The idea of that was that a lot of mountain biking takes place in remote areas throughout the country, and it was very difficult for people to actually get to a central area to do a in-classroom course, so to speak. The other opportunity, so once you become a regional commissaire, the idea is, and we'll talk about it a bit more further on, is that you get as much experience as you can in that space. But if you do want to become a national commissaire, you really need to be able to commissaire at all of the disciplines. So you need to be able to go to a GE event, to a downhill event, to a cross-country event, to a cross-country marathon event, about a commissaire, and be comfortable to commissaire at all of those events before you become a national commissaire. And then after you've been a national commissaire, if you're young enough and you're keen enough, you can progress through to be a UCI Elite National Commissaire, which you have to go and do either an online course or an in-classroom course. The last course was run here 4 or 5 years ago. And then after that, again, if you're young enough and you're keen enough, you may get the opportunity to become a UCI commissaire, although that's fairly difficult to progress to. There's not a lot of those courses happen. There's not a lot of UCI commissaires around the place either. Anything else, CC?
No, that's perfect. So from here, we're going to take you to the resources page. So back to coaching and officiating up the top here, and to the resources page. So between Jeff and I, we will just highlight a few of the key details. So Jeff highlighted that for the regional commissaire, you need to do the e-learning. So you can access the e-learning through the tab here on the resources page. We will talk a little bit more about re-accreditation later, but there is the ability to renew and re-accreditate your accreditation. We'll just highlight two of our lovely commissaires on the call here. We've got Peter and Daryl making a show on the Oz Cycling website. PCP reports. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the PCP reports there, Jeff?
Yeah, sure. So if you're going to be a PCP, if you're allocated a job as a PCP at an event as the principal of the commissaires or president of the commissaires panel, you're supposed to fill out a report after the event. It's a fairly simple form. It's an Excel sheet that you just tick and flick a few boxes, and then write a little bit of a story about it, and attach the copy of the results and any other relevant information. Might be the tech guide and various bits and pieces, any medical reports and things like that. And that should be forwarded through to the events team at Oz Cycling. That's valuable because it makes you think about what happened at the event. It also means that if that event's run again next year, that someone else who might be allocated for that role can get a copy of that report and have a bit more an understanding of what might have happened at that event, where things need to be improved. Likewise, the organisers get a copy of the event, of the report, and it gives them an idea of where they can improve and areas that they've done really well in as well. So it's really just summarises the event in a one format in one place.
While you're going, Jeff, would you mind talking about incidents? And I'm not sure if you've had to apply much infringements with an event in mountain biking.
We try not to do that in mountain biking. We try just to have a conversation with people about things. I mean, there's been a few cases where a couple of things have happened that have then been addressed, and Daryl was involved in one of those a few years ago where there was a bit of a kerfuffle with a couple of riders, and it went through a sports commission process. But as far as not obeying the rules or disqualifying someone, that's something you're always going to come up against from time to time. It's really a matter of knowing the rules, knowing what you're doing, and being clear and concise with your conversation with the riders before that process happens. Certainly, we're not like road and track where they send a hand out fines for everything. I see Susan having a chuckle there. That's just, I don't know, it's just not in the spirit of mountain biking.
And can you talk us a little bit around incident reporting as well, please, Jeff?
Ooh, yeah.
Or maybe it's out together as for Steve, possibly along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to. There's some good reference points there on the on the website there, but I think some of this is about, I think similar to what Jeff was calling out before. I think it is important to ensure that from an event review perspective, we are documenting and capturing incidents that might have taken place during the event. That might be relevant to some follow up around a medical response or something similar. We also see insurance claims being made, from time to time, as a result of an injury at an event, and in some cases, riders or spectators and the like, might have a situation that they choose to take out proceedings against an organiser, in the case of negligence or the like. So if we've got a bit of a paper trail and we've got the ability to sort of, capture some of those incidents out in the ground, it just makes the job easier to, join some of those, situations up, and, it makes the process of review much clearer.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing I'd add with that is the fact that it's important from a medical perspective, if there's an incident where a rider gets injured, is to get the first aid provider to provide that report back, because they're the ones with all that knowledge, all that information. And in a lot of cases, that information can't be released with the junior rider, unless you've got the parents' permission from the first aid provider to release that. I mean, we recently had an event in Canberra, a national round, where we had quite a few incidents, and it took a little while to get all of the specific data back from the first aid provider, but they provided it all, and all of those reports fitted the bill for the incident reports.
Yeah, and I think it is also. I think the other point here is that there's some guidance, some really important guidance in there as well, for the commissaires, around how we, how we need to collectively sort of manage a critical incident as well. So, unfortunately, from time to time, people will be put in a pretty sticky situation, where, they've got to make, decisions, alongside and with the organiser. So there's some good guidance in there around sort of, how we collectively make those decisions as well.
And Susan's highlighted that concussion management is also really high focus. There's an increased awareness over the last 3 to 5 years around this topic, and there's a bunch of helpful information around that. When a rider gets deemed with a head injury, we do get notified, and the rider does get put on suspension for a period of time until medical clearance is provided, or a clearance is provided. Additional information can be requested or provided around that process should a club, a commissaire, or a rider wish for more information on that. Peter Hoskins, you've got your hand up. How can we help?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I always just take some Oz Cycling incident forms and go to the medics. They're always an off-site team and have their own systems, like we said, for privacy if they can't. So the easiest way I've found is just you hand them the copy that we need, and they're really normally quite happy to do them as they go through the weekend. You just rock up again at the back of it and they give you hand the copies over. So I just found that's the best way to always get copies. If you go at the end of the event, you end up causing them heartaches, obviously trying to duplicate paperwork and what have you.
That's a great nugget of wisdom. Thanks for sharing with us today, Pete. So there's a whole bunch of other helpful information here. I won't go into the specifics, but I would encourage you to go for a wander around the website when you have time. So technical regulations are super important. They can get updated periodically. So if you haven't looked at those in the last window of time, I'd encourage you to download an updated version. The commissaire log is also important. So it is great when you come to renew your accreditation that we have a list of the events that you've supported. So there's a template there that's available. And then there's more information about commissaire appointments, but we'll come back to that shortly. So we've got some lovely commissaires on the call. We've got Susan Mitchell and Daryl Cram, who, as I highlighted before, have a wealth of knowledge around mountain biking and also some other disciplines, and they're comfortable and happy to share their story and how they got into this journey. So Daryl or Susan, who would like to go first? And what I'd like you to share is how did you get into becoming a commissaire? If you can highlight any training that you took, and then maybe share some events or experiences that have shaped you along the way.
Thanks, Cece, and thanks for having me on board tonight. My journey is probably quite different to most of the others on the call. I was a social rider, doing fondo type things, mainly road, a little bit of off-road stuff. I went back to Scotland in 2010 and volunteered at the Scottish Track Champs, just to find out what was going on and to get close. So I'd always loved going and watching cycling at that point. From there, they said, you should be a commissaire. So I went through the track training there, came back to South Australia, and they said, oh, well, if you've done track, you do road. Port Adelaide then said, well, you're okay at road, so how about you come and do CX? So I did CX, and then I think probably Jeff's got a bit to blame here because he said, well, you should probably go and do the rest of mountain biking. So I did my mountain bike national course when we were lucky enough to run one here in South Australia. And that's probably about 8 years ago now. So it's been a really good exposure to all the different disciplines. I've often joked that I should just go along to BMX just to try it out. But I'll probably stick with what I've got, keep the focus at the moment. But I think, whilst there's differences in all the events, there's also lots of commonalities. If you can judge a finish in a downhill in terms of stopping the stopwatch, you can do time trials. If you can judge an XCO, you can then do XCMs, you can do short tracks. And I think probably the strength that I have is that I spend most of my days training people. So I'm used to working with teams, as Jeff says, that communication when you're working with other people. So if you are the PCP, you want to take other people along on that journey, but to me, being the PCP in an event is almost one of the easiest jobs when things are going well, because you do get to kind of have that overview, you see what's happening, but it's, the commissaires that are doing the judging, that are doing the starting, that have got probably the harder jobs. Probably the harder things for PCPs would be some of that people management. So when things are not going so well, you've got to step up and either bring the team together, back up what your commissaires are doing so you're not dropping somebody in it, but also working with coaches, sometimes working with the athletes to, you might not be happy. I mean, as Jeff said, we try not to disqualify people, but certainly some of the road events have disqualified people for crossing the centre line blatantly. It's a clear safety risk. It's clearly briefed. You're disqualified when you do it. And it could go as a positive conversation. It could be a negative conversation. So I try and keep it positive. I do try and use education a lot. So because I know I don't know everything about the events. I've never experienced racing a downhill. So I'm very happy to talk to people that have raced downhill and, learn from them. And examples up in Mount Buller recently, when I was on the downhill as the chief of that team, was when we were doing the track walk, listening to some of the elite riders and the more experienced riders, so that I could take on board their views rather than me thinking, oh, that doesn't look like a problem. Why can that be bad? You need to be able to listen. And then I think you get more respect from the athletes if you seem to be listening and applying what they're saying, even if it means moving rocks out the way. So, yeah. So, I've probably had quite a few memorable events. I think anytime you're involved at national or UCI events, you want them to be a really good, positive thing. So I was lucky enough to go to Road Worlds in Wollongong. I was at World Masters last year. I've done a couple of the 7 gravel events over in WA. Yeah, and now lucky enough to get some PCP appointments for national, so XCM and then the gravel this year.
Fabulous. And being a female commissaire, how do you find that? And what would you encourage others in the community to get more women into the space? And how do you find work at being maybe one of minimal females in an event? How do you, tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think I remember having this conversation with someone and saying, do you want to be the token female or do you want to be there as part of the team? And I'd like to think that most of the women that I've worked with have earned their spot in the team. And I know when we're looking, because I'm on National TechCom as well, so when we're looking at putting together teams for events, gender balance is certainly something that's in there. And probably if you've got the role models that are women, then you're more likely to bring through more women. So certainly having us there, having the team photos that show that women have got opportunity is really important. And I know when I'm at events and talking to people that show a bit of interest, I'm certainly really happy to promote it. And I've not found it a problematic experience. You know, I've only ever had good experiences. And maybe that's my communication style. So
thank you for sharing.
No, we certainly do need more women, and we need those younger women coming through. So the 30, 40 kind of age group that can then have the opportunity to go to UCI would be really valuable.
And what I hear from that space is sometimes women aren't as confident to step up. So if they can find another commissaire who's willing to mentor them or allow them to shadow or create a safe space to ask questions and allow them to check and challenge, that really does enable them to step into their own and enables them to make more confident and comfortable decisions, and therefore, like Susan's highlighted, be a role model for other women along the way. Thank you for sharing.
And I'm really
Susan.
happy to chat to anyone that has got questions, queries, you know.
Fabulous. Well, if you want to reach out and connect with Susan, feel free. There'll be some Oz Cycling emails at the end. Flick us an email and we'll connect you to the two of you together. Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Daryl, I'm going to throw over to you. Could you tell us, please, a little bit about your journey, the training you've undertaken, and some of the events and experiences that have shaped you?
Yeah, thanks, CC, and welcome the magic group of 15, which I notice there's Susan and CC. Not many ladies joined in, even though as also part of the Oz Cycling Tech Commission, we tried to encourage ladies and basically anyone to become a commissaire, to fill out the ranks of commissaires. There's been various events that I have been at where you see a marshal and they might be a parent and they say, oh, what does it take to become a commissaire? And it's like virtually nothing. It's the next step up really from being a marshal, and you can still be involved with cycling. So I was a cyclist in various forms during my life until I think I was marshalling at the World Championships in Canberra. And then I decided, well, being a commissaire might be a reasonable way. My son's getting near the end of his racing. So just like Jeff, instead of following around being an official with their son, I was actually following around being an also ran filler racer with my son, until the point it was like he was over racing and wanted to move on and do various other things with his life. So I became a commissaire instead of being an also ran racer in the late masters categories. And that's what started my journey back with MTBA in early 2009. I've been lucky in that I'm also involved with a road club in Canberra. So I'm involved with Cork and also with Vikings Road Club in Canberra. And so I'm a commissaire, road track, cyclocross, and various mountain bike disciplines, except I haven't had a chance at snow downhill yet. I'm sort of hanging out for Steve to organise one, in this coming season, so I can try that. And but I've been to like the World Championships here in Canberra as a volunteer. I've been to the Mountain Bike World Championships up in Cairns as a commissaire, the Mountain Bike World Cup in Cairns as a commissaire. I managed to scunge my way into the World Grand Fondo Championships in Perth as a commissaire. That was sort of on the dark side and a different experience, because if you think of a Fondo being a race as opposed to a participation event, just like a 24-hour mountain bike race, it's sort of, for some people it's participation. You stop at 10 o'clock, you sit down, you have dinner, you drink a few glasses of red wine, you wake up the next day and cut a few more laps. It's the way mountain bikers do it. But road's a bit different. So my journey has been wide and varied. I've been like Jeff, I've been the PCP at a national mountain bike champs, and been yelled at by various parents of, as Jeff puts it, parents of future Olympians, and really commissairing and again, taking from Jeff's sort of tact, is you only have two sorts of events. You have one where it's based on time, whether it's a downhill, a time trial, point to point, and the other one is on laps. So, you could basically get a track commissaire who hasn't fallen asleep or their neck's turned off from turning round and round and round, to run your cross-country Olympic, because it's based on laps. At Buller, it was when basically the team doing lap counting and taking numbers were frozen just as much as the riders because of the weather there. So
we'll talk a little bit more about national temp weather later on. I think there's some great learnings for those on the call from that event. And
then back in the year before the Commonwealth Games in Brisbane, I managed to get on the UCI Elite National Commissaire course with a bunch of people, including Peter. And, that puts us one level below a UCI commissaire. The UCI commissaires, you have to have started your journey virtually before 50, and at 70 you're pensioned off. Whereas UCI Elite National Commissaire, it's up to your federation to decide when they want to pension you back down to a national commissaire, and it's not through peer pressure. So it can be, Susan's working on a document to make sure that I'm fit enough to carry on being a commissaire. But it's an interesting journey, and I'm sure all of us who have participated in international events have had a great time and are willing to share. I met a Spaniard last year at the World Masters Mountain Bike Championships in Cairns. He was 50-plus-year-old that won the downhill and then fronted to beat his next closest competitor in the cross country by 2 minutes. Tommy Misson is just a machine. And you meet these really nice people, and it keeps you going on in the sport. So during summertime, I do road crits for the Vikings Club, and then other times I'm doing mountain bike stuff. And I've just decided I'll race gravel. So I'm heading off to the national championships in South Australia at the end of April. Yeah, so, you're never too young to race, and you're never too young to start your commissaire journey.
And that's a great segue. We've talked about getting more women included in the sport. The other part that Oz Cycling is keen in to get some more young and middle-aged people into the sport as well. Like Daryl highlighted, there are age limits at those higher levels. And if being an elite national or the other level is something that you're keen to do, then definitely feel free to knock on the door and put your hand up, and we can see how that plays out with the next course. So moving on, we'd like to start talking about other Commissaire opportunities, and I'm going to hand over to Steve and a little bit of Jeff to kind of talk through more around opportunities to get involved as a mountain bike Commissaire, and also talk through the nomination process to get involved.
Yeah, thanks, thanks CC, and thanks to everyone so far. Thanks to Susan and Daryl for sharing a little bit of the journey, and it's been I guess I've been in and around the cycling family for the best part of 25 years. So in across all the various disciplines. Started with Oz Cycling fresh out of uni after doing my sport management degree, and literally started at the side of a track event, volunteering at a track cycling event, and then joining what was sort of Cycle Sport Victoria back then, the old Cycling Victoria, and so I've always been on sort of the administration / organizer side of things. I've been I suppose more at the pointy end of the organisation of cycling events for, call it, the last 15 years. And I've got to travel the world on the organisation side as well, and so it's been interesting from my perspective to see, that there is a pathway that exists on the staff side, but it's also been, I've shared much of my journey, alongside a lot of commissaires over the years as well, and I've always been a really passionate advocate for the role that commissaires play, both from the perspective of the contribution they're making, but also the experience they're creating, and there is such a marked difference between an experience that you have at a bike race with a friendly, helpful panel of commissaires, as opposed to the alternative. And so and I think I've grown to really respect what a highly competent commissaire looks like, and we've certainly got a bunch of them on the call tonight. So that's a bit of a spiel, but just to sort of circle back to the concept of opportunities. What we're trying to do, I suppose, coming back into the Oz Cycling family, I've been in this role since August last year. We have been in the mountain bike side of things starting to use Com Manager in a much more active way. It's many of you will be familiar with it, and certainly there are people on this call that are more expert than me in Com Manager. But it is a platform that will enable us in the longer term, to develop some really good tools and tricks and captured data, which will sort of help all of us, both on the commissaire side, but certainly on the Oz Cycling side from an administrative perspective. And so what we've done a much better job of this time around, looking at the season we're in 2025, is to try and populate Com Manager with a lot more of those opportunities. From a forward-facing perspective for the commissaires, it gives people much more visibility on what those opportunities look like. For those that are might be regional commissaire qualified and looking to sort of take the next step and nominate themselves for some of the other events, but also on our side, I guess, as a cohort of people who need to ensure that we're creating an ecosystem that's sustainable. Certainly coming into it like I have, it's so important that we've got a much better understanding of how many active commissaires we've got out there, in the various accreditation levels, because I think part of what we've all been talking about is, how do we introduce that next generation of comms into the ecosystem, and Comm Manager is going to play a key role with that. I'm just going to share my screen and just point people to what I'm sort of referring to a little bit. I assume everyone's got that on screen now. Yeah, cool. So just to scroll down, through that same page that CC had up before, if I dive into the Commissaire appointments section, so I guess just a little bit of how we think about this from an administrative perspective. This is really topical at the moment. We've got, I've got my head very much squarely, as much as we're sort of wrapping the back end of a 2025 National Series season, we're already very much got our head in 2026 season. And I think what we want to do from I suppose, a progress perspective is ultimately get to a position where each year, earlier and earlier, we're in a position to, effectively try to announce, some calendar dates, at least at national and international levels, so that, we can, push those dates out and allow, all of the very many people out there, whether it's in state land or private promoter land, to fashion their own set of dates to complement those. So actually, the ambition for 2026 is actually to have the vast amount of the calendar for 2026 announced in July this year. So that's what we're ambitiously working towards. And I guess from a Commissaire perspective, the sort of flow on from that calendar announcement is that we will then look to populate Comm Manager with the vast majority of those calendar dates. So basically inviting the commissaires at that point to put their name forward and nominate to be part of the panel. So depending on the hierarchy of the level of the particular event, whether it's international, national, or state, the composition of the panel, can be such that, we've got, a combination of, UCI commissaires, elite national, and regional. So Comm Manager is set up in such a way where it, more or less, makes itself available based on your level of accreditation once you're in there. So from a sequencing perspective, this time around when we launched the 2025 season back in, I'm going to call it September or October last year, soon after that calendar announcement went live, we were able to probably within 4 weeks or so have the vast majority of those appointments live, or inviting expressions of interest effectively. Then in the space of about sort of 6 to 8 weeks, I think we basically went into the cave and started sifting through the nominations and working towards making that nomination. And so call it sort of December time, I think we were in a position where most of the appointments had been made, and then we get out and notify the commissaires. Many people will be familiar with how Comm Manager works, but if not, and noting that there will be people who pick up this recording post tonight, as I scroll down here, there is a download that's available here and a link to the Comm Manager. It's effectively a bit of a technical know-how guide, and it explains how people are able to log in, create a profile, and then start to appear on the system and have access into the system. So Louise Jones has done a power of work, leading on most of this process. It's an ongoing evolution, this document, but I won't go through this page by page, but just to say that it is available on that same page. For those that want to familiarise themselves more with Comm Manager, we'd obviously encourage everyone to, to ensure that they have a profile set up on Com Manager, even if they don't feel like they're yet at the stage where they feel confident to start nominating themselves. I think familiarising yourself with how the Com Manager system works and the types of opportunities that are available to you is important. So again, I won't go into this in huge detail, but if you go to view upcoming appointments, it's going to take you ultimately to the Com Manager appointments page. And then because we're talking mountain bike, let's sort by mountain bike. So if I go up there, search by mountain bike as a discipline, and then search that, that'll then filter all of the opportunities that are available on there, by mountain bike. So as I scroll down, you can see, we do have, a really significant number of events that are posted on there, and this is nationwide, obviously. And certainly it gives you the opportunity to, go further in and sort by state as well. So that's the Com Manager system in a nutshell. And as I scroll down, you can see, that just how many events are on there. And so there are still openings right across the board, and into state series events and the like. So there are certainly live opportunities, very much so, in that space. So that's probably a Com Manager in a nutshell. Yeah.
If someone sees an open opportunity, how should they approach that, or what's the best process for them to nominate or put their hand up if they're newer to this process and haven't got that original communication?
Yeah, so so basically every one of these events along here that says open, that basically says that that is a position that's available for nomination. So so it's a case of just jumping in and nominating yourself on there. You'll then, depending on the particular event, you'll be contacted by either Oz Cycling or directly by the host or the organizer, who will be looking to contact you and take up your offer effectively, to join. And what we acknowledge we've got to get probably better at is just explaining how that sequence works off the back of that process, because realistically it is different event to event, and so sometimes it is a club or an organizer who are effectively organising it directly, including the commissaires, and then other times, say for a national event, and national champs in particular, it's Oz Cycling, our team working directly on that and delivering and assembling the panel. So but yes, we that's how that tends to work. So I saw that in the note. Did you want to share your screen, Susan? Is that?
While Susan's doing that as well,
yeah.
It'd be great to talk about cross-discipline support, Steve.
Yeah. So look, similar to what's been talked about before. We do want to get better and better at being clear about how some of those opportunities are offered across disciplines. So, for example, when we announced the mountain bike calendar and the nominations, we certainly included road commissaires, on that communication, and so we'll continue to look to do that across the various calendars, and vice versa, by the way, for to ensure that mountain bike commissaires are offered opportunities across disciplines where it's relevant as well. There are some criteria around which particular roles you can fill according to the particular event. In some cases, you can just fulfill a judge position, as opposed to sort of take a lead PCP role, but there's certainly some great opportunities across discipline.
Here we go. So hopefully that's come up on people's screens now.
Yep.
So basically, to nominate for the event, I would click into the spare line, and then I could, let's see what we've got. What's an essay? Nominate for something. So let's say I was going to do the inside line event. So I would just click on to here. That then populates into the line, and then it comes up as to whether sometimes PCP is available, or I can click into member. Once you've gone through and you've selected all the events that you want, basically we can go to save or save and log out. And then once you come down below, you can see the events that I've been appointed to. So that comes up through there. So I will undo that one because I don't know if I'm actually around. There we
Thanks
go.
for sharing the back office part of the system there, just for that perspective for the commissaires, especially the new ones on the call today.
There you go. And we'll just stop sharing there.
Oh, that's helpful, Susan. I haven't even seen it from that side of the fence, so to speak. So very helpful.
Wealth of knowledge in the commissaire community, and happy to share. So thanks, Steve. Anything else you'd like to add before we pass on to Jeff to discuss other opportunities and responsibilities?
No, I was just going to say, just similar to what we were saying then, the cross-discipline, focus, there is some more detail on that exact page, if people want to sort of, scroll down and see what we're referring to around that. So.
Fabulous. Thanks for sharing, Steve. Thank you as well, Susan. And Jeff, do you want to discuss how our commissaires can take on more responsibilities and the larger role they can play in their community?
Sure. I'd just like to add something about Com Manager as well.
Sure.
In the blue, which has got the name of the event, typically there's a link. If you click on that, there's a link that goes to the organisers page. So if I click on the inside line, let me turn my phone off, it's going a bit crazy here. Inside line downhill event in South Australia, it takes me to the inside line page. So if you are looking at Com Manager and there is an event that you're interested in that, and you may not feel comfortable as nominating on Com Manager, you might just actually be able to get in contact with the organisers and say, hey guys, can I just come along and help out and just get some extra experience in that space. And to that point, one of the things with a regional commissaire, so if you are a regional commissaire, the idea of the name, or where the concept of the name regional commissaire came from, is that it's a regional commissaire. So I live in Canberra, so the Canberra region is basically south of Sydney down to the Victorian border. So regional commissaire should be able to operate in that space without any great amount of problem, dealing with clubs, with private promoters. But also, if there is a national level event in your backyard, don't be scared to put your hand up and go along and help out, because that's always a really great way to get lots of experience. The PCP at that event, once you make contact with everyone that's going to be on the panel, all judge what experience you've got. They'll ask you what you want to do, where you want to get more experience, or they should do, and then try and facilitate that as best possible. A good example is that, I knew, as an example, I'll pick on Susan. Susan has got a lot of experience with road and track, and hence cross country. She's very comfortable in that space. But for national champs, I thought really good opportunity for Susan to get a bit more experience in the downhill side of things. So after a conversation with Susan, she became the downhill chief, and that worked really well. I think she got a lot of experience. Some of the other people that came to champs wanted to get a bit more experience at being the secretary for the event. So we gave them the opportunity to get some experience in that space. So no matter where champs are or where national series rounds are next year, or the bigger events, and if it's in your backyard or you're nearby, put your hand up, go and help out. It's obviously the first place that events start is with your club and with the various clubs in your space. So a good example is in South Australia, where there's 3 basically different clubs. One organises mountain bikers in cross country, inside line do downhill, and is it Geezer, I think, or South Australia, GE South Australia, they organise GE events. So, and they'd always be looking for people to come and help out, to come and give a hand at those events. So don't be scared to put your hand up, even if you go along and just, hang around in the background and just be a key marshal and work your way up through that and get more and more experience. The other thing that's really invaluable is to actually help run events. I've been lucky that I've been race director at a World Champs, a couple of World Cups, and lots of other events. That you get a lot of experience of how to actually put an event together, what goes on behind the scenes. So when you are a commissaire in an event, you have a lot more empathy with the organiser about what they're trying to do. So you tend to be less demanding on them, tend to pitch in and help a lot more. And it makes a much more collegiate environment for everyone to work together. Did I answer your question, CC? Is that enough?
Brilliantly.
Thanks.
So we're going to move on to the questions section shortly. So if you do have any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. A couple of other details to set up for success. A commissaire accreditation does need renewal every 4 years. Through the commissaire officials resources page that I showed you earlier, there is a link there. What's required as part of that journey is completion of some e-learning modules and maybe some top-ups around anti-doping, clean sport, gambling, those kinds of things. That can change as well as the sports and the requirements on sports and commissaires evolve. There is the need to maintain a current working with children and provide evidence of your logbook. Once that information is submitted, it generally takes 10 business days for that to be reviewed behind the scenes, and then your membership profile will be updated and a confirmation email will be sent out. We do often get lots of questions around, what do I do when my working with children or one of my documents is expired? So you can see on the screen here, the officials email is the main point of contact for any paperwork kind of things related to commissaires. I will just jump forward a couple of pages, but if you would like to, if you've got questions around accreditation details, training information, documents and certificates, that's best sent to the officials email as highlighted on the screen. If you have questions specifically around an event or the nomination process, then the events email provided on the screen is the best place to submit that information, just to ensure it's a large organisation, it gets sent to the right person. So the fun part, there doesn't look to be any questions in the chat today. We did highlight national champs this year. We had a great event, but also on the last day we had a weather impact. And I think it's fair to say as a commissaire at some point in time, the weather will impact, whether it's cold and blowy like it was at Mount Buller or hot and sweaty like it can be in southeast Queensland or some of the other states. There does have an impact on a race. It'd be great to hear from Steve and Daryl and any of the other commissaires who were at the event. How did you make the calls? What information did you digest? And some of the other key bits and pieces that kind of helped you ensure that you were running this race in a safe, fun, fair and inclusive manner.
Yeah, I can kick off, CC, and just to answer Billy's note, there was a query around that. So yes, we can absolutely take a regional commissaire nomination for marathon champs. So if you're keen, Billy, and given it's your second home by the sounds of it, go for it. Yes, that's right. The PCP happens to be on the call. But just to take us back to Buller, we had the most exceptional weather for the entire week up until Sunday, and maybe that's why we copped it. But we did wake up with the notification sitting in our phone saying that we did have some severe weather warnings that have been issued by the BOM. We'd also had overnight, the night before on the Saturday night, 98 kilometres an hour wind gusts that had been registered. So So the warning was real. It certainly was, and so at first light we had team people out on the course effectively assessing the course. That's the first thing we've got to do. To actually determine whether there's whether there's damage out on course and things that we need to deal with immediately. And at that point, we were, Jeff and I principally, Jeff as PCP, myself, and then also working in with the venue, with the resort management, starting to have the conversation about sort of what the day looks like. We did make a really critical early decision, which was just that we wouldn't be starting at 8 o'clock as scheduled. So that bought us immediately, some additional time to start making a plan B effectively, and determining whether actually plan B was possible. So Jeff effectively had, his cross-country chief starting to work on what a potential schedule might look like, a condensed schedule, recognising that we were likely to start the day later than planned. And then we also had, people out on course, include myself, looking at what the course footprint could look like. I think it was sort of my judgment call that, the existing XCO course was probably too exposed to, the risk of trees falling on it, frankly, based on the wind gusts that were projected, through the remainder of the day. So we opted for a course that had, for example, some less tree canopy. It had a little bit more fire trail use, which, given the density of the races, would be such that, there would be more overtaking required. Then, we probably had to look at, taking on a course that probably allowed for a bit more overtaking and a bit more fire trail as opposed to single track. So we really just assembled those potential plan Bs, over the course of, about an hour or so. And then, it was then the decision was taken, to let's push ahead, let's push out a new schedule in the first instance, we said race 1 and 2 would be on the shorter course. And we'd see and assess the day, as it played out. But in the end, we pushed ahead and actually kept all 4 of the races on that that shorter course. It made for some pretty grueling racing. We certainly shortened the racing, shortened than you usually would according to the tech regs. But I think we can all reflect at the end of the day on the fact that we were able to effectively award all of our XCO national champs for 2025. When, to be honest, there were, depending on how you look at our extreme weather policy, there were certainly question marks on whether we should and could actually go ahead. So that sort of the key collaboration that takes place on site, on the organizer side, my eyes are on the overall emergency management. And then, Jeff and team are focused more on, ensuring that, from a sporting integrity perspective, that, we can hand on heart say that we're awarding national champs, based on on the composition and the format of the race. So I've probably taken too much of your time, Jeff, but do you want to add some?
No,
thoughts?
You're right. You're right, Steve. I think the key thing was that we recognised really early. I mean, I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was blowing a gale outside, and then I looked at the bomb at probably 5:30, and I think I sent you a text about then. And so the key thing was to have a conversation with everyone, was to get the key stakeholders together, have a conversation, make a decision that we were going to wait, so we weren't actually rushed into anything. We had to then deal with some blowback from a few riders and things, because the weather, whilst it had been blowing a gale early on, there was a bit of a lull between the prefrontal northwesterly push and then the southerly gales and squalls that arrived afterwards. And really then the key thing for getting going was to minimise the risk as much as possible, which, as you said, was to move the course out of the forest. And we were lucky that we had, I mean, really Andy Miller and Chris Clark, who were TDs for the event, did a sterling job. They got out there and got all that stuff sorted out. They rode the laps. They made sure everything was good. They went and mapped the laps so we could actually tell people where they were going. And then I think we made decisions and then communicated that fairly clearly to everyone that wanted to listen. And then we had to adapt as the day went on, because I was talking to Daryl earlier in the week, and we actually bumped into Beck Henderson on the way home, and Daryl said to Beck at the service station, did she realise that she actually raced longer and further than the elite men did? So the elite women's race actually went longer, but by the time the elite men's race was coming around, the UCI categories for the men was coming around, the weather was just deteriorating. It was not only blowing, but it was absolutely chucking it down. And then we actually were then looking at the fact there was a bit of a concern, saying, well, you know, how cold is it going to get, because the temperature was dropping. So then there was potential for hypothermia and things like that. But in the end, we didn't get the snow hung off until Monday morning. But as Steve said, we got it done. So we condensed the schedule from 5 races to 4, and then basically worked a fix around making that happen. But it was quite interesting, because on Thursday, I think it was, Steve, we were having conversations with Buller about the fact that we might have to call Saturday off because of a high fire danger. And they were concerned about that. So we went from being worried about high fire danger on Saturday to basically wind and rain on Sunday. But yeah, so the takeaway for me was to slow down, don't make any rash decisions, look at all the information at hand, take things on board. It was a very defendable situation we had, because it was a warning that was issued by the bomb, so it was issued to everyone. It actually mentioned Mount Buller, and so it was quite a defendable situation to then say to all the competitors, hey guys, we need to just take stock for a minute and think about what's happening here, and then make a move on that. So, yeah.
Probably one thing, Jeff, just in the context of this forum, from a commissarian perspective, I think worth mentioning is that the first 2 races were run on a time basis.
Yes.
So that it was there wasn't a confirmed number of laps. For those that are front in the start line. Get the races underway. And really in a dynamic fashion. Start timing the laps and make a judgment call. With making two laps to go, but using that data through the first 2 races to inform how we approach races 3 and 4 as well.
Jaz, do you want to explain what you did in running those first couple of races, how you did that?
We basically went into a cyclocross / XCC cross-country criterium mode, where you pick a target time and then work out the number of laps based on the lap times, the first lap time or the second lap time. So the idea was that we put the women out for roughly an hour. The first race was the under 17s, I think, and some masters categories. And so they went off in 3 waves possibly, and we based that on all the people were informed that the lead rider, no matter who it was, whether it was Miles at the back or one of the young guys, they would determine the end of the race, and we'd put out laps to go and a flag. And I think, people would say it was only a 3-kilometre course, but to anyone who rode it in those conditions, it was a bit more than a 3-kilometre course. And unfortunately, to me, they really earned their national jerseys if they competed that time.
Yeah.
So
it was hard yards.
Yeah, you can carry across all those, from discipline to discipline. It just happens that Com Manager thinks I'm road, mountain bike, CX, track, BMX and gravel. But you just cross all that knowledge across and go, well, we can work this out. We've given them an estimated time. If the weather, Steve had got his team out there and we could shut it down really quickly. The 3Ks was manageable, and we gave them a time, roughly an hour, but we'll let you know as we get close. We'll hold out lap numbers, and if it gets really bad, we can, put the checkered flag out and determine it on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point that Daryl's just made there. Is we did make that judgment call that with that shorter loop that we could effectively, from an emergency management perspective, warden that course so that if suddenly the weather deteriorated and we got the cold front in very, very quickly, we would be able to effectively evacuate all the riders off that course in an efficient and safe way. So that's a really good point to mention there, Daryl, as well.
Gentlemen, would there be a difference in your decision making? We talked about Buller being cold, wet and windy. Would there be a difference if there was a hot or heat weather warning in your decision making process for an event?
I think if there was so previously, I think in 2013 or something like that, when we had a national series round at Buller, there was bushfires nearby. They throw up a different issue because bushfires, there's only one road in and out of the place, so that you'd need to act very differently for that. But if it's just hot weather, you'd probably employ a similar sort of process. If you're at an event and there wasn't a fire risk, but it was hot weather, you'd go through unless it went above the extreme weather guidelines that are on the Cycling website, which everyone should understand how that works. Because that's more a feels like. I mean, the chances of having those conditions at Buller are pretty slim because of the altitude. You'd probably get the maximum temperature, but you're not going to get the humidity. But again, you'd put in an extra feed zone, shorten the course, and shorten the races. So you'd go through a similar sort of process.
Fabulous, thanks for sharing. So we're coming close to the end. We'll just give one last opportunity. We've got a hand up from JR.
Yeah, so I was there, and I know it was very fluid, but the message seemed to get across. I just had two relative questions to that. Do you guys, like I do it sometimes, do you guys work out your plan B track before the weekend? That's the first question. And the on the WhatsApp, the information was coming through good, for want of a better way to say it. But should we as commissaires also address the conditions to the riders? E.g., it's going to be cold out there, make sure you prepare for that, as in, underlayer and stuff like that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of takeaways from that, JR. So the course, I didn't actually look at alternatives for the course myself, but I knew that the locals and Andy Miller, who'd been there a few times as a TD, knew his way around the hill pretty well. And we also we'd had the XCC course, so we'd used a bit of that as well. So that was actually cobbled, for want of a better description, cobbled together quite quickly. There was a couple of little bits that the boys had to go out and have a look at to make that happen. So yeah, look, we didn't actually look at it, but the guys on the ground, the venue, the TDs, they pretty much put it together very, very quickly. And then the WhatsApp group, I think, worked pretty well. The rider, when does a rider need to take responsibility for themselves in the weather? Like, just as people say, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad planning or bad, like bad organising. So, I think at Buller, we'd let all the riders know fairly obviously that the weather was changing. I mean, you could see that. You could see it wasn't very nice and it was getting colder. And if they chose to ride out without the right equipment on, well, then that's really their call. We're not there to be their mothers. We're we're there to run a race and to run it fairly and to look after things. I mean, obviously, and keep an eye on it. Obviously, if someone ended up in a situation where they were clearly indisposed because they had dressed incorrectly and they'd got wet and ended up being a bit hypothermic at the end of it, which actually was probably quite likely if we'd had to race any longer, because once you're wet, and if the temperature keeps dropping, you've just got no insulation. And particularly, I mean, it's all right for me, I carry a bit of insulation around myself, but the cross country guys, they're all whippets, they've got no extra padding on board, so it's going to have a big effect on them. So I hope that answers your question.
And I think it's a good point, Jeff. The other thing I'd always say is that, as the importance of the event is elevated, sometimes it means that riders aren't making sensible decisions because, they are just so uber focused on, their performance in that event. So, that by design, it means that they might be potentially putting themselves at risk, when, the importance of the event, is such that it demands they're all. So so sometimes you do have to make a tricky decision as an organizer and by extension as a commissaire, to sort of intervene in that a little bit and not leave that decision up to the riders sometimes.
Yeah, there was also
I think one issue that might have come up would be the fact that the elite or the UCI categories had back numbers. So whether people would choose not to wear a gilet or a jacket or something over the top. But because we've got plate numbers and we've got transponders, I'm sure, Daryl would have much preferred someone came over with a jacket covering their number but didn't get too cold, because we've got other ways of tracking people.
Yeah, I don't think, I think we would have been very pedantic if we'd started to pull people up on things like that. Yeah, in the spirit of actually getting the event going, I think that was probably, and I didn't even think about that. So yeah, I think that was probably a fairly minor thing. Yeah, but
absolutely.
on the upside, I had a few of the coaches of under 19 and 23 riders say this is really good to give them experience when they go to Europe, because you're going to go to Europe and race in the Alps, and you're going to get weather like that all the time. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, that was a really great conversation. I hope that the commissaires on the call took some things away, and thanks, Pat, for sharing your experience as a first-time commissaire jumping into the regional to the Nats downhill at Toowoomba that was impacted by the weather. That must have been an interesting learning experience for your first event. Awesome. Look, recognise we've taken up our time allocation for this evening, so really do want to say thank you for that and for joining us. To our speakers this evening, thank you very much. Is there any last nuggets or words of wisdom you'd like to share before we finish the evening tonight? There have been a bunch of nuggets and words of wisdom, so I do appreciate you sharing those. Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us and wanting to expand your knowledge. We hope that you found the session valuable and that it's inspired you to continue your journey as a commissaire. We encourage you to stay connected with us for future events and opportunities. And if you have any questions or feedback, the emails on the screen are the best place to connect. Thank you for your time this evening. Thank you to Steve, Daryl, Susan, and Jeff, and for all of you for joining us. Take care and happy riding.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.